Welcome to Payoff Pitch, Action Network's Major League Baseball betting podcast. I'm Mike Calabrese, joined by Sean Zerillo. We're going to break down Monday's slate in Major League Baseball. And a reminder, you can always count on us for best bets on Monday, Tuesday, and Friday throughout the week. We're also going to have people parachuting in like Grant Neiffer with his home run prop bets, as well as Billy Ward's Yerfy Nerfies. Today, we're going to get a little bit of Grant's, and hopefully it's not warning track power. But before we jump in here, Sean, I got a couple questions for you. Let's start with this. Is it time to fade the Padres? You look at their record, they're 13-3 straight up. They're tops in the majors and a few power rankings around the internet. They just went 5-1 in back-to-back series, albeit against the A's and Colorado. But now they're set to host the Cubs, and then they go on a 6-game road trip to Houston and Detroit. Is it time to fade the Padres?
I think we're getting close to it, if not already there. Now, this team is currently without both Jake Cronenworth and Jackson Merrill, which leaves Gavin Sheets, Luis Ariz, and Jason Hayward is the only left-handed bats in their lineup. I was very down on the depth of their lineup coming into the year, their rotation depth coming into the year. Randy Vasquez, Kyle Hart still occupying 2 of the 3 rotation spots, and they really do not have any depth behind those guys until Yu Darvish comes back. But if they sustain any injuries, there's very little rotation depth for the Padres, and offensively, there's almost no position player depth whatsoever. So if Manny Machado goes down, or Fernando Tatis, who tends to get injured every single season, gets hurt again, I think the Padres are an extremely vulnerable team. I bet their win total for the season under 87.5 when it opened. I bet them to miss the playoffs. When it opened, it didn't seem like they were going to make any free agency moves at the time. They ultimately did end up signing Nick Pivetta, let a bunch of other guys walk. But, with Pivetta, Cease King, that's pretty good rotation, like top 3 guys in the rotation. If you make it to the postseason, those are 3 pretty good arms to run out there. But they've also talked about trading Dylan Cease and Luis Ariz, who are in expiring contract years. If they maintain an above 500 record, if they're still in the playoff hunt, that's probably not going to come to fruition. But as you said, they played a pretty soft schedule to start the season. The Rockies, the A's, the Guardians. I know they beat up on the Braves. The Braves got 1 hit with runners in scoring position in that series. They were very unlucky. And when they played the Cubs, they lost 2 of 3. So getting the Cubs coming in here again. The Cubs now down Justin Steele as well. That's worth noting for the Cubs' long-term outlook. This is a team who looked really good against the Dodgers. They seemed like a sneaky NL pennant contender, World Series contender as of this week. And then losing Justin Steele takes some steam out of their sails. So I like the Cubs today. We'll get to it in the favorite underdog section. But going forward, I think that Justin Steele injury is fairly significant. And going forward for the Padres, batting Jose Iglesias 6th, Jason Hayward 7th, like having just a couple of effective left-handed bats, I do think they're going to run into a very cold stretch at some point.
We're still in a very small sample size for this season, most teams having played between 15 and 18 games at this point. But there are some breakout stars, and I'd love to see where you're feeling in terms of these players potentially maintaining this level of play, or it's just a bit of a flash in the pan. So I'm going to give you 3. Jung Ho Lee from the Giants. He's slashing 352, 426, 704. Then you got Spencer Torkelson, 309, 409, 673. And then in terms of power and speed, Kyron Paris and his 5 homers, 5 steals. He's also batting 368. Of that 3-pack, who do you think still maintaining an all-star level of play come the midsummer break?
I think Paris and Lee could both do it. Torkelson's strikeout rate is just too high. It's still near 30%. And he's the kind of guy who has obvious power. I mean, he's a former first overall pick. There's still obvious upside there. And you saw it come to fruition 2 years ago. Last year, absolutely tanked again. So high fly ball power hitters like Pete Alonso tend to go through periods where they're very streaky, very bad, not putting the ball in play, like lose sight of just being a regular hitter, putting the ball the other way, etc., because they're just trying to hit home runs. And as a result, they're not hitting the ball square. They end up flying out a bunch. Pete Alonso absolutely locked in to start the year, as is Spencer Torkelson. So I think Torkelson can have streaks where he's very good. And then he's also going to have streaks where he's extremely bad. And it's very difficult to project when those streaks are going to come and what you're going to get out of him over a 6-month stretch. You might just have a 6-month stretch where he's locked in and hit 45 to 50 home runs. He might have a stretch like last year where he can't hit the baseball at all and get sent down to the minor leagues. So high strikeout rate, high fly ball power hitter guys can be extremely streaky. As a result, I think Torkelson is a big risk. Kyron Paris shaved 10% off of his strikeout rate relative to the past couple of years. And strikeout rate is something we can talk a lot about early just because it tends to stabilize much more quickly than other data points. Paris was at 38% in 60 plate appearances last season. It's at 21% in about the same number of plate appearances this year. So I think that's a good early indicator for Kyron Paris, just that he's going to put the bat on the ball more frequently. And if he can maintain that 20% strikeout rate, I do think he can be an effective major league player. And of the three guys you listed here, he does have the best power and speed combination. Projections have him hitting about 11 homers the rest of the way with about 20 steals. So he has 20/20 upside amongst these three guys. That is the best power and speed combination, because Jung-Ho Lee is not a home run hitter. I know you saw him pop 3 over the weekend in the Bronx. This is a guy who ranks in about the 33rd percentile for bat speed, the 20th percentile for maximum exit velocity, and he's playing in Oracle Park. So he's not going to hit more than 8 to 10 homers in a season, but what he does do is avoid the strikeout, walk a decent amount, run the bases really well, and play great defense. And overall, that is a much better real-life player than it is a guy for fantasy baseball. He's not going to be a guy who necessarily, especially in on-base percentage leagues as opposed to adding average leagues, he's probably not going to be a guy who stands out over the course of a full season in fantasy in terms of getting you homers and steals. He's going to be a good runs contributor, a good batting average contributor, a decent on-base contributor. But in terms of real-life value, being able to stick a guy like that in center field who can have an OPS north of 750, play league average defense, run the bases really well, that is an all-star caliber major league player. So maybe in terms of all-around ability, defense, fielding, base running, maybe Jung-Ho Lee is the best of the three. Maybe he does ultimately have the best season and the highest wins above replacement total. But in terms of ceiling, choosing them out, I'd probably take Kyron Paris, who's also a little younger. Paris is 23. I think Lee's 28 and has also had a number of injuries, throughout his career in Korea and then already here in the U.S. So going forward, give me Kyron Paris among this group. But in terms of 2025, I think Lee certainly is the highest floor.
If you're listening in and it's a coin flip for you between Lee and Paris, I'll just add this little nugget from my research. His nickname, at least according to Baseball Reference for Lee, is Grandson of Wind. That's just awesome. I just love little weird tidbits like that. So just something to consider if you're thinking about adding them to your fantasy team or a player prop or two. Before we got hopped on, Sean, you were talking about an interesting trend that you're seeing in terms of situational plays purely on Saturdays. What are you seeing in the baseball market as it relates to totals?
Yeah, I'd noticed this in prior years too, but the totals were just higher. They were jacked up on Saturday relative to the rest of the week. I didn't adjust anything in terms of my run scoring environment. The weather was fairly comparable on Friday compared to Saturday in all of the same ballparks around the country. Yet the average total was about a quarter of a run higher on Saturday compared to Friday. I do think books on more public days they expect more average Joe bettors to be firing on these games. I do think they raise the totals up, anticipating that most people are going to bet the over as compared to the under. And as a result, they put these totals just a little bit higher. And you saw I was betting a pretty balanced portfolio of overs and unders throughout the week, Monday through Friday last week. Saturday, it was like 6 unders, no overs. It was just very apparent to me that the market was jacked up in favor of the overs or towards the overs, trying to get sharper bettors to bet the unders, anticipating that public action would come in on the overs. So just something to keep in mind. Fridays, Saturdays throughout the year, I remember that from years past, the opening totals may be a little bit higher than what you're expecting if you're keeping your run scoring environment the same throughout the week. Other thing I noticed, we can get to this in terms of games that I passed on betting for today, because the one bet that was probably in range that I did not play was the Milwaukee Brewers. Situationally, this is a disaster for them. Back-to-back comeback losses to the Arizona Diamondbacks, gave up that 4-run ninth inning on Saturday, and then yesterday had a 2-0 lead. They bled that game away late as well. Arizona, team we talked about a lot coming into the year, being a very safe playoff team most likely, liking them as a potential long shot in the National League if they do make it to October. They have the lowest strikeout rate in baseball. They have the third highest walk rate. This team is on base every single inning. They put the ball in play every single plate appearance unless they're walking, essentially. They just keep the line moving throughout the game. And when you have a team who's, down in the game, you're trying to look for them to come back, maybe looking for live opportunities. It's just good to know the safety of their offense. They're going to put everything in play, or they're going to work counts and they're going to walk on these pitchers. They also grind down starting pitchers and get into bullpens really effectively too. So the longer these series go, the deeper they get into the bullpens, the more they see these relievers And I think come postseason time, they're going to be an absolute pain in the ass to play against if they make it there, just because of how deep they get into every single count. So I like to look for teams early in the year who are regularly coming back on opponents or putting opponents away late. And by that, I mean they have a 1-run lead late in the game, 7th inning or later, and they go, here's 4 runs for you. Now it's a 7-3 game. Best of luck. And the Dodgers, the Astros, these teams did that consistently to people in the past 4 or 5 years. So far, the Diamondbacks and kind of the Blue Jays are doing that to people early on. So just keep an eye on the D-backs, especially. Toronto, though, also walking at a very high clip, not striking out that much. I think Toronto, a very sneaky team in terms of making contact and playing good defense early on. We'll get to the Jays in a little bit, but there might be divisional and playoff value on them right now.
Let's start, before we talk Blue Jays, with your best bet. We have the Red Sox traveling down to Steinbrenner Field to take on the Rays. The Sox have lost 5 of 7. They dropped their series in Chicago to the White Sox. They only scored 6 runs in 3 games. Not a good look for them. But is this a bounce-back spot? They are drawing Shane Baz, who's been electric to start the year. 13 innings pitched, 16 Ks, only 2 earned runs, albeit against the Pirates and Angels. Walk me through this as a potentially good spot to grab the Red Sox at plus money on the road.
Yeah, I kind of just like the combination of the Red Sox and the over here, partially because I do think Tanner Houck has blow-up potential. I've discussed Houck. I've bet against him twice, I believe. This is my first time betting on him this year. But last year, career-high workload, about 178 innings. Previous high was around 106, and there used to be that Tom Verducci rule where you don't want to increase innings by more than like 50 in a year, otherwise it dramatically increases the impact of arm injuries. You know, that's kind of been disproven over time, but there was an obvious decrease in Houck's effectiveness in the second half. His strikeout minus walk rate essentially halved between the first half and the second half of 2024. Now his stuff plus is down this year from 106 to 98. His strikeout minus walk rate is about 4.5%. So seeing the dip in performance last year, seeing it carry over into a stuff dip and a further performance dip in 2025, all gives me significant concerns. His velocity is maintaining a similar level, but he's just getting fewer chases, worse results on his pitches overall. But as I discussed it a number of times last week, betting on them, betting against them, the Red Sox do project much better against right-handed pitching as compared to left-handed pitching on offense. About 12 points better in terms of WRC+. Casas, Devers, Duran, Willie Abreu, all left-handed bats and all much better bats overall than the right-handed bats on this roster. I like Bregman after that story and, you know, their catchers, like it's just much less effective bats overall. So if you're going to have a right-handed pitcher against them, I think you have to, you know, deal with the platoon advantage, Boston having it every single time, as compared to throwing a lefty against them. I think you have a much bigger advantage if you're throwing left-handed arms at the Red Sox throughout the game. Bet against them with Easton Lucas against Garrett Crochet. That line kept moving up against me. Never really lost confidence that the Red Sox would get shut down in that game. I had the under too. So do not like the Red Sox nearly as much against lefties as compared to righties. I'm very high on Shane Baz. I was probably like the first person publicly proclaiming my love for Shane Baz and that he was, you know, a top whatever 20 pitcher in baseball when he first came up. Dealt with a number of arm injuries since then. Has come back. He looks great so far this season, but the matchup against this Boston lineup I think is much more difficult than what he's faced already. Can add in Yoshida too to the Red Sox mix when he eventually comes back. Another left-handed stick for this lineup, which is just like better than their right-handed bats. Now, the one thing I did mention here is I want to be on the Red Sox and the over. Because again, in Tampa today, 79 degrees, 5 to 7 mile an hour winds blowing out to that short porch in right field. This park is going to play small, given the dimensions, the Yankee Stadium dimensions in Tampa, but also the weather. We discuss this regularly. This wind is going to add or subtract about 60 feet of batted ball distance, depending if the wind is blowing in or out. Yandy Diaz hit a home run on the over that we bet last week. That probably should have gone about 260 feet, and it ended up going 322 feet and barely clearing that right field wall just because the wind happened to be blowing out. It's blowing out tonight. It's not going to be blowing out at night throughout the entire season. As we get later in the season, August, September, the wind should blow in more during the night and make this more of a pitcher's park during the night. But in April, the wind patterns historically here do blow out a little bit more than they will later in the season. We're getting it blowing out tonight. Jacked up my total to closer to 9.2. So the over 8.5 up to about minus 115. Would even consider 9 at plus money considering this park wouldn't go much past that. But then I also want the Red Sox at any plus money price with it.
Let's turn now to your favorite underdog. We talked at the top about the Padres, potential spot to fade them. You like the Cubs here up against Dylan Cease. They're about plus 140 as a dog in the market. You can make a pretty compelling argument that the Cubs have the best offense in the NL right now. They're third in the bigs in slugging, third in doubles, fourth in homers, and they've driven in more runs than any team in Major League Baseball by a wide margin. The caveat being they've played 2 extra games with that Japanese series to start the year. All that being said, they've exceeded expectations early on. This was a borderline top 10 offense coming into the season across all of Major League Baseball, but they're just absolutely crushing the baseball. So in a matchup that could be a high-scoring game, you like the dog here.
Yeah, and as I mentioned off the top, like the Padres do not have Cronenworth or Jackson Merrill right now, so they're very right-handed heavy. Jamison Taillon is a righty, not going to have to face many opposite-handed hitters. Gavin Sheets, the biggest threat amongst them, but I mean, Jason Hayward should not scare anybody batting 7th, and having Iglesias 7th, Iglesias 6th, Jason Hayward 7th, like this lineup was shallow coming into the year. It's even worse now once you take Merrill and Cronenworth out. I think it was a relatively effective lineup, at least 1 through 8 with those guys in there. With both of those guys out, this is a weak offense. You have a couple of stars, and beyond that, there's nobody to drive anybody in the back of the lineup. Now, they do have a good bullpen. They do have Dylan Cease starting today, so they have the pitching advantage throughout the matchup. But as I said, this is a team that I rate closer to an 83, 84 win team that has started out hot against not very easy opponents because they didn't play the Braves and Cubs, but against a weaker than average schedule. They've mostly played non-playoff teams. They beat up on those teams. They got a little lucky against the Braves. But overall, I make the Cubs about plus 125 in this game. Happy to bet them at plus 135 or better. And they are playing quite well coming in here, playing really well against the Dodgers, putting up that 16, 17 run game the other day. And one of the guys we predicted might have a breakout potentially is Pico Armstrong, who homered last night. He said he wants to steal 60 bases. He's not getting on base quite as much as he needs to in order to do that. His on-base percentage is still below 300, but you have seen some significant changes from him, moving deeper in the batter's box, trying to get, just like technical changes to try to get his swing more on time. I do think PCA breaks out a little bit more as the year goes on, but so far, he's been the best defensive outfielder in baseball. Basically said Pete Crow Armstrong, Gold Glove center fielder coming into the year, maybe the best defensive center fielder. That's really the thing with this Cubs team is throughout the lineup, they may have the best defense in baseball. Blue Jays are up there, but the Cubs might be number 1 positionally just because they have 3 legitimate Gold Glove caliber defensive outfielders. Dansby up the middle is one of the best shortstops. Porter is above average second baseman. Like the only guy who's even average is their third baseman, Matt Shaw. Everybody else is above average, if not elite defensively. So going into a lot of these matchups, I'm probably going to show value on the Cubs because I do think I am a little bit higher than the betting market on them if they have their regular defensive lineup in there. It is a very strong defensive lineup that should steal a lot of hits. Just my concern with them in any game is the bullpen. I find that bullpen extremely concerning. I find Ryan Presley to be an absolute heart attack. I didn't show any first 5 value here, or otherwise I probably would have bet it just because the bullpen advantage could be fairly substantial for Padres.
When we look at the rest of your card, you just mentioned first 5, maybe a first 5 angle in the Mets versus the Twins. Mm-hmm. The Clay Holmes experiment as a starter, it's trending in the right direction. He was fantastic against the Fish in his last start, 10 Ks, 5 1/3 innings worth of work. You like him and his team in a first 5 against Twins in Minnesota.
Yeah, big difference in home run rate here between Clay Holmes and Jerome Ryan. They actually project as very similar pitchers in terms of overall effectiveness, the FIP ranges. They're both number 2 caliber starting pitchers, sub 4 FIP projections between 3.75 and 4. Holmes actually projects slightly better, but he plays in a better park. But the difference in home run rate is dramatic, and the likelihood that Clay Holmes gives up a home run to put the Mets behind is so much lower than the likelihood that Joe Ryan gives one up to put the Twins behind. Ryan 1.4 for his career, Holmes about 0.6. Now that is while serving as a reliever, throwing his slider and his sinker a little bit more aggressively. He's had to introduce new pitches working as a starting pitcher. He's throwing his kick change, throwing a cutter, and his ground ball rate has dropped. Clay Holmes has a ground ball rate historically closer to 65%, 66%. It is down to 50% as a starting pitcher, and his command is also worse. He's throwing a lot of balls, getting into a lot of deep counts. The walk rate is increased. I think because he's trying to be a little bit too fine. And also, I think he knows I have really nasty strikeout stuff. I could probably strike out 10 guys a game if I want to. Why even give them the chance to hit the ball if they're going to chase stuff outside of the zone? Like right now, he's figuring out his new arsenal. He's figuring out how to manage his workload as a starter and how to optimize himself. The pitches that he's added, the kick change, the cutter, the kick change grades well, the cutter does not. So we'll see if he keeps throwing the cutter throughout the season, if it continues to get decent results. This is a guy who's going to continue to modify himself throughout the season. Career high of about 60 innings over each of the past few years. He started earlier in his career. He's still stretching the arm out. He can get closer to 100 pitches now. But in terms of how to manage those 100 pitches and get through the start and when to attack hitters, when to make them chase or decide if they should chase, when to waste pitches, like this is all still adjustments Clay Holmes is making on the fly. So seeing him get 10 strikeouts, seeing the strikeout stuff there is super encouraging. Optimizing it, becoming more efficient, I think is something that's going to happen over time. But like even still, I think that ground ball rate goes back closer to his career average than staying at 50%. The sinker is still nasty. The slider is still elite. The pieces are all there for Clay Holmes to be a number one caliber starting pitcher. He's just basically getting back into starting. So he's developing on the fly. Now, the thing that's really stood out to me so far is the Twins. They lost Royce Lewis in spring, which wasn't surprising, but they still should have a good offense even without him, and they've basically been league average. The Mets rank similarly, but the difference between the two teams is runners in scoring position. The Twins have been fine with runners in scoring position. The Mets have a 154 average runners in scoring position. They're dead last in baseball. So the Mets should be a little bit luckier on offense going forward. They have a much higher chance of hitting home runs against Ryan, as the Twins do against Holmes. And I make the Mets about minus 115 in either half of this matchup. So minus 1 or 5 or better, either first 5 or full game on New York against the Twins team that has been very disappointing to start the season. And I don't think the arrow is pointing up anytime soon, considering the underlying metrics. Like the bullpen has been league average. The offense has been league average. It seems like a relatively rudderless team at the moment. I think organizationally, these guys know they're not going to spend any money because the owners are trying to sell at the moment. So it's as I've said before, it's a very weird season in Minnesota, but the team hasn't really done anything encouraging under the surface to point to this bad start being anything other than, realistic.
Turning to the Giants, Phil's potentially an interesting opportunity to sell high on Taijuan Walker. He's been a great story. He's an incredibly hard worker. He made alterations to his mechanics in the past year. And so far through 2 starts, it's all paying off. He hasn't given up a single run yet. And despite a low batting average for the Giants across their lineup, they have decent power numbers in terms of doubles, home runs, slugging. Can they knock him around a little bit? And will that be enough to entice you to take the Giants' money line?
Yeah, Walker's velocity is back to where it was 2 years ago. I mean, he had a really solid season for the Phillies. I know we won 17 games. Any other team, he's not winning 17 games or whatever that was. But an ERA in the mid-4s. And the velocity was down to like 91.5 last year. It's back up to 92.8 this year. The problem is, even though the stuff has come back, the command does seem like it's worse early on. His called strike plus whiff rate is at a career low. The whiffs are still down. The location plus rating on his pitches are down. So it seems like he could be effective as he was 2 years ago, and be, a back-end starter, an effective number 5 or number 4 starter with a 4.5 ERA, as opposed to having a 7 ERA, which he had last year, and being one of the worst pitchers in baseball. But even though the stuff has come back up, or the velocity has come back up, the underlying stuff metrics, the body array, all says he's still the same pitcher that he was last year. So I do think Walker can be as good as he was 2 years ago, but the command needs to come back with the stuff. Like he's still missing that element. He had the stuff and the command relatively functional 2 years ago. Last year he had the command, not the stuff. This year he has the stuff without the command. So overall, Landon Roop is a guy who I think is going to be underrated by the betting markets because he has sort of like no prospect pedigree. There was no hype around him coming up, but he projects super well. All of his projections sit around a 4 FIP projection, a little bit lower than that. He has 2 really effective pitches. He has a great curveball, but he stopped throwing the curveball a little bit as much this year. He was working more so out of the bullpen last year, threw the curveball 45% of the time. Curveball's down to about 25% this year. He's mixing in a cutter. He's mixing in a changeup a little bit more frequently. And those pitches don't grade well, but maybe they can help him set up his curveball against lineups as he's turning them over 2 or 3 times. And he's pitched well thus far. He's had a ground ball rate above 50% at every minor league level. He has a 0.4 home runs per 9 throughout his minor league career. Like, this is a guy who should suppress hard contact, keep the ball on the ground. Not going to wow you with the strikeout and walk numbers, but I do think can be a very effective starter at the major league level, a league average starting pitcher. And you pair that with above average Giants defense, I think it's a good fit. You know, bringing in Willy Adames, this team last year had the worst defensive shortstops combined, I think over the past 3 or 4 years. Basically, since Brandon Crawford started aging, the Giants have had like the worst defensive shortstops in baseball. Willy Adames closer to league average. And Matt Chapman is the best, if not the second best, defensive third baseman in the league. So closing up, shoring up that left side of the infield, that helps Roop, that helps Logan Webb. You know, it helps this Giants pitching staff in general because they do like to pitch to contact. And the Giants, for me, may have the best bullpen in baseball. It's them or the Dodgers probably right now. Really effective relief group. If they have a lead late, I feel very comfortable about them holding down the fort. So pitching edge for the Giants, not only over the first 5 innings, but I actually give them a slight bullpen advantage over the Phillies, even over the final 4 frames. Make the Giants about minus 105. So anything plus 102 or better would be a bet for me. And then same thing for the full game, or for the first 5 innings and the full game, about plus money. Anything plus money on the Giants is fine.
When I got the call up from the Action Network brass, and they said, you know, you're going to host Payoff Pitch, my one hope was to identify 1 or 2 pitchers to just ride until the wheels come off. And I'm going to say it right now. This is an Easton Lucas podcast until further notice. First 2 career starts, 2 wins. His last start at Fenway, he was locked in, 8 Ks and 5 1/3, allowing just 4 base runners. No reason to get off the train now with the Braves, you know, on deck. What are your thoughts on this matchup beyond what Lucas brings to the bump?
Pacoda thinks the Jays are the favorite in the American League East. They have them at about 28% to win the East. They have them north of 50% to make the playoffs. You can still get 2-1 on the Jays to make the playoffs and 7-1, 8-1 on the Jays to win the American League East. I mean, the Yankees still have significant injury concerns. You know, Garrett Cole's not coming back. Giancarlo Stanton seems like he's coming back, but the effectiveness remains a big question mark. And then Judge, Chisholm, like these guys remain significant injury concerns. So the Yankees are vulnerable. The Red Sox, Devers is still an injury concern with the shoulders. Garrett Crochet threw his career high in innings last year, which is way more than he's thrown at any point since leaving college. The Red Sox are very injury prone. Baltimore has no starting rotation. And the Rays, I do think, are going to overachieve, but I mean, I'd still take Toronto's roster head to head against them probably. The Jays are live. This is a wide open division. It is both better and worse, I think, than we thought it was coming into the year. Like somehow the AL East seems both better and worse than it was, just a few weeks ago. I think because of all the injuries, you know, the Orioles injury, like the Orioles lost their whole rotation. You know, losing Grayson, then losing Eflin. They lost Andrew Kittredge from their bullpen too coming into the year. The Orioles just super banged up. But because of all these injuries, the Jays do have a really high floor because they're a top defensive team. This was the best defensive team in baseball last year. They rank 5th in DRS, 5th in outs above average early on this season. I think they can maintain that top 5 defensive level, and that is just going to lift their overall floor. But it's really the line. You look at the lineup, and you're like, who are some of these guys? Alan Roden and Will Wagner. Like, these are not names that the common baseball fan knows. Even me as a talent evaluator, you know, I looked at this roster coming into the year and I'm like, who's Alan Roden? I don't know Alan Roden. These guys just play good defense. They seem to do a good job developing position players, at least getting them to being major league average players. Even guys like Spencer Horwitz, who they, you know, called up last year and then traded. Like, they seem to be okay at developing positioning players. Pitching has been the huge issue for the Jays. I mean, you see all the guys they sign, these older arms they sign. Aside from Bowden Francis, they really haven't been able to develop very many arms. The arms they have developed, like Alek Manoah, have gotten hurt. They've gotten a lot of guys hurt. Ricky Tiedemann, who's been their top pitching prospect for a while, hasn't made it to the bigs. So finding pitching has been really difficult for Toronto. Easton Lucas is a guy they claimed off waivers from the Tigers, and I'm like amazed that this guy was available on waivers because it seems like at worst, he should be a highly effective left-handed reliever. He's got a really nasty slider. and a very good sinker to go with it. So at minimum, this guy should be a loogie, an effective left-handed reliever against lefties. He does need a third pitch. He's trying to throw a changeup. It doesn't grade out super well by stuff models, but he does have good command of the pitch. And as long as he has good command of it, I think he could be a relatively effective major league starter. Projections have him around the number 4s, like a 4-5 FIP projection. I do view Grant Holmes as the better pitcher. I like Grant Holmes. I've bet on him a few times already this year. He is a really nasty slider. But Holmes, I would put in a similar category where it's like this guy could probably be a pretty nasty reliever if they converted him. He's trying to make it as a starting pitcher. He's trying to have the arsenal work behind his slider. We'll see if he can do it. Now, the Braves, I think, have just underachieved at this point in the year. I still view them every bit as good as I did a few weeks ago. I still think this is a 95-plus win team. They're getting Strider back this week. Acuna, probably not too far away either. But overall, I make the Jays about minus 120 in this matchup. Happy to bet them up to about minus 112. I think they've been super undervalued to start the year in the betting markets just because of how they performed last year. And I think the biggest difference is the bullpen. They had the lead a lot last year and could not hold it down. I lost so many money line bets last year on the Blue Jays where they had a lead and then blew it. The bullpen actually seems to be holding down leads this year. Jeff Hoffman, who had some medicals go wrong with the Blue Jays or with the Orioles, looks like he's pitching fine and healthy so far in the year, and the bullpen is just doing a little bit better than it was last year. So overall, I think Toronto's been an underrated team throughout the preseason into this season, and I think they remain that in the futures market. And now may be the time before people catch on to the Jays being a decent team. I still think we're going to get a very goofy group of 3 teams out of the AL East making the playoffs. I think one of the Yankees or the Red Sox. And I feel like the Blue Jays and the Braves are both going to make it. I'm just trending that direction where it feels like both of these teams, who probably very few people gave a chance to at the bottom of the division, I feel like they're both going to get in. I think one of them is, but I feel like both might.
The Pirates and Nats playing in Pittsburgh. It has been easy money taking over on Pittsburgh home games this year, 5-1 to the over, but we get Skeens with the ball starting today. Can we trust the Buccos to get, to 5 runs? Do you think that's what it's going to take in terms of your model for this one to go over 7?
Yeah, I think so. About 5 runs for the Pirates against this Nationals pitching staff, which they threw a lot of innings against Miami over the weekend. This is not a good bullpen, and it is not well rested coming into today, which are good things you want to see for this over. But there's also rain in the forecast. Decent weather, but rain in the forecast. 70 degrees at first pitch, 9-mile-an-hour winds blowing out to left field in Pittsburgh. But what does rain generally increases run scoring? Forget the weather that accompanies rain. The rain itself generally increases run scoring by about 3 to 4%. That seems a little odd. Why? Well, less pitch grip for the pitchers leads to more walks. Slicker grass, wetter baseballs, more difficult to field, so more misplays in the field. But also rain is typically accompanied by humidity. And when there's more humid air, the ball's going to fly just a little bit further. That was always super counterintuitive to me, that heavier humid air would allow the ball to fly further. But that is the case. And the humidity should be high enough tonight in Pittsburgh to increase this run scoring environment north of league average, like 4% above league average, where on a normal day, this is probably closer to a league average part. 98% of league average, like 2% below, even leaning towards pitchers. So overall, the weather, the rain should increase run scoring tonight. I make this total about 7.7. I bet over 7 up to minus 115. And Skeens, it's worth noting, Skeens, he's given up some runs this year. The underlying indicators suggest that he's better. He has a 145 expected ERA. His body ERA has gone down from 362 to 317. His expected FIP has gone down from 254 to 225. So even though he's gotten hit a little bit to start the year, gave up some runs in his last start, the underlying metrics say that Paul Skeens has actually optimized himself even further compared to last year, which, doesn't seem humanly possible, but he has added a couple of new pitches to his mix. And I mean, him not winning the NL Cy Young, I really do think boils down to health. I know Hunter Green has been phenomenal, Schwellenbach, both phenomenal to start the season. Skeens just projects a little bit better and in a different class than every other pitcher at this point, Skubal included. I'm going to include Skubal and Crochet in that category. Those guys kind of fit around like a 275 FIP projection. Skeens is pushing closer to 250. I mean, he's just absolutely sick. But even that said, right, even making Skeens the best pitcher in baseball, even assuming he's going to pitch 80% of this game. I still think the Nats can get the 2 runs against him and the Pirates bullpen. The Pirates bullpen is not good. Really, all the Nats have to do is just try to get him out of there early. Don't even try to score runs, just work counts. Like, just work counts, don't strike out, take walks where you can, take deep counts, put the ball in play. That's your best chance against Paul Skeens, is just get him out of the game and get to the Pirates bullpen. Because the Pirates do not have a good bullpen. And the quicker you can get Skeens out of there, the better chance you have of actually scoring runs against the Pirates pitching staff. If they can get out of there by the 6th inning, they can get 2 or 3 runs. But yeah, it's probably going to come down to the Pirates and scoring runs off of a bad Nationals pitching staff. But given the weather and the wind and the humidity, this should be a decent run scoring environment.
Before we get to Grant's home run props for Monday, let's close it out with one more over Yanks and Royals. I love the Yankees bats, and then you put into the mix Carrasco on the bump for the Yankees. Woof. I mean, he's been serving up BP soft toss. I mean, his last game against Detroit gives up 3 home runs, doesn't even get out of the 5th inning. The 38-year-old is clearly just trying to eat up some innings here. He is over the hill. So the fact of the matter is this number, let me check the latest here, sitting at 8.5. I think this one is primed to go over. Of all the ones you're offering in terms of totals for today's slate, this is the one I like the most because I think there's potential for both of these teams to go north of 6 runs. Am I seeing that properly? And should I even sprinkle a little bit on an alternate total, maybe over 10?
Yeah, potentially. I think this could be a very high scoring game. Carrasco is an absolute abomination at this point. He's just there to eat up innings. Garrett Cole has left vacant. 85 stuff plus, 14% whiff rate. I think that sounds high. 14% whiff rate is not a chance. Maybe it's a strikeout rate, but like the whiffs aren't there anymore. The stuff is at a career low. The command is at career worst levels. Carrasco was a replacement level starter 2 years ago. He's managed to hang on because of reputation. There's oh man, I can't think of the pitcher. I want to say it's Steve Avery, though that doesn't sound right. But there's an old adage about how one good year in baseball could buy you 5 extra years of playing time, just because everybody's still searching for that one good year that you had. And it seems like Carrasco, a guy who has a lot of reputation, he's a good character guy too. And he overcame cancer. He seems like a beloved teammate. So there's reasons to keep Carlos Carrasco around beyond what he's actually doing on the field. And what he's doing on the field at this point, you could find with almost any minor league pitcher, probably. But that said, Seth Lugo's really struggled to start the year too. His strikeout minus walk rate is half of what it was last year. This is a guy who finished second in Cy Young voting last season. His command is way down. And as a result, I think there's a chance that Seth Lugo has some injury concerns this year. As I've discussed regularly, command first thing to go, last thing to come back. Before and after Tommy John, before and after UCL injuries. Believe me when I say, I hope that is not the case for Seth Lugo. I would never wish that upon any pitcher. But I'm here. My job is to recognize patterns. I said this with Sandy Alcantara last year. I did not wish this upon Sandy Alcantara, but I said very early on in the season, I think this was 2 years ago, I said Sandy Alcantara probably dealing with a UCL injury following his substantial workload and the Cy Young campaign. Seth Lugo is a guy who spent most of his career as a reliever, started 2 years ago with the Padres, had the workload further increased last year. I think there's a good chance that Seth Lugo is dealing with injury concerns. He's also 35 years old. His peak year was last year. This is not a guy who's like breaking out at 34 and continuing to become a Cy Young caliber pitcher through his age 35 and late career years, even though the workload on his arm from earlier in his career is not substantial. I do think you hit the peak with Lugo last year, and now his metrics look a lot like they did 2 years ago when he was with the Padres, when he was closer to a league average starting pitcher as compared to an ace. And even the underlying stuff last year still said his ERA should be closer to 3.75 than 3. This year, he's back north of 4, in that 4 type range. So I think Lugo, the injury concerns are obvious, but even beyond that, I do think he was due for regression compared to a career year in 2024. I think he pitches closer to his 2023 self going forward, if not worse than that. And the Yankees, absolutely dominant against right-handed pitching so far. We'll see if they can maintain that and maintain the health of their lineup. That is the biggest key for them throughout the year. It's just keeping this lineup healthy because there's a number of guys in there who are injury prone. But I made the Yankees about minus 135. I would bet them up to minus 125. I think it's already sitting at minus 130. So it's a pass for me on the money line at this point, but the over 8.5, certainly like that. And the last game I want to mention, because I did not bet it, the Milwaukee Brewers at plus 140. I do project value here. If you go into the Action Network app, if you go into our projections tool, they blew both of those games, the past two games against the Diamondbacks. They threw basically their entire A bullpen on Saturday, blew that game, threw more relievers on Sunday, blew that game behind Freddie Peralta. Their next three games, Tarek Skubal, Casey Mize, Jack Flaherty, and they have to throw out Tyler Alexander, Quinn Priester, and Jose Quintana. This team desperately needs an off day to rest their bullpen, just to reset mentally after blowing these games late. And now they're facing the top of the Tigers rotation with the bottom of their rotation and a banged up bullpen. So while I project value on the Brewers today, I'm absolutely not betting them. And I'm probably not betting them until after they get an off day on Thursday. It's just a very bad situational spot for Milwaukee coming off of that series and coming home to a Tigers team that is playing really good baseball.
Now it's time for Grant Neiffer from Scores and Odds to look into his crystal ball for some home run bets on today's slate. Take it away, Grant.
All right, thanks, guys. Let's get into what everyone's been waiting for. Some dingers. Got a 3-leg parlay over on FanDuel sitting at 162 to 1 odds if you use that 30% profit boost. Let's get right into it. Rafael Devers hit home run. It's sitting at plus 420, plus 467 when it's boosted. He has been a little bit hit or miss this season, but looking at the underlying numbers, even though he only has one home run so far, has a higher barrel rate than at any other point in his career. He's hitting the ball hard. He's playing in a good ballpark over in Tampa Bay. Again, it mimics Yankee Stadium. And so good for lefties. Weather in the high 70s, which you're not finding anywhere else at this time of the year. So matchup versus Baz, who's been above average for lefty power throughout the course of his career, giving about 1.3 home runs per 9 to lefties. So overall, plus matchup, plus ballpark, plus weather, and Devers' underlying numbers are fantastic. This line is too low. Next up, we got Anthony Santander. He has not been great so far this season. 1 home run, but he's coming off a massive 44 home run season, so there's no reason that this should continue here. Matchup versus Holmes, just an average one, but he's far too good of a home run hitter to have odds like this today. Plus 400, a bit too high. And lastly, we got Big Pete Meat, plus 390 over at FanDuel. Gets a matchup versus Joe Ryan, who Joe Ryan is a massive, massive fly ball pitcher. Rate near 50% in his career versus righties, giving up around 1.7 home runs to righties over the course of his career. This is a ballpark upgrade for Alonso. And it is a little cold. Temp's going to be right around 50 during game time, but the wind blowing out around 20 miles an hour over in Minnesota is a ballpark upgrade, with the weather kind of being average when you consider the cold weather and the wind blowing out, but huge plus matchup going up against Ryan. So Big Pete Meat, 40 home run hitter, and he should get one today after already having 4 on the season. That's all I've got. Again, use that profit boost to get these odds up to 164 to 1 today. I'm out of here. Like it.
As always, rooting against warning track power, hoping the wind's blowing out for you. You get some of those short porch home runs, gets you over the top. Thank you, Grant, for your contributions as always. That'll do it for today's episode of Payoff Pitch. Thank you for tuning in. If you'd like to tail some of the bets that you heard in today's episode, look for the quick slip links in the episode description. And don't forget to download the award-winning Action Network app and leave us a 5-star review wherever you listen to the podcast. Also, check out the Action Network Discord. You can cut it up with Action Network experts as well as people betting on Major League Baseball every single day, just as you are. We'll be back tomorrow with Major League Best Bets for Tuesday. For Sean Zerillo, I'm Mike Calabrese. Thank you so much for listening to Payoff Pitch, the Action Network's Major League Baseball betting podcast, and best of luck with your bets.